Hi everyone, my name is Crystal Bruin and I'm presenting the Aboriginal perspective on Bill C-38 on behalf of my group, which includes myself, Sharifa Radet, and Rita Merrick. Our presentation is divided into three parts, which includes the community level, the provincial level, and the national level. To begin at the community level, which is where I have done personal research, we have the actors. So who are they? They are the people. They are real live human beings like yourself and I. The only difference is that they have a culture that is rooted in their deep connections to the land. They make up 4% of the Canadian population and they have 600 plus First Nation bands across Canada. These people see themselves as stewards or protectors of the land and all living organisms. They have valuable information and insight that could potentially help the government, and it is important to note that they should not be seen as just another environmental group. Now, in my research, I talked to 10 different First Nation groups across Vancouver Island and the Lower Mainland. I basically wanted to find out what these people knew about Bill C-38 and find out the possible effects of the bill on these people. I talked to just regular band members. I talked to chief counselors. I talked to the chiefs of their tribes. I talked to lots of people, basically. And there was quite a consensus that nobody even knew about Bill C-38 or the effects. So what are the issues? There has been no information provided to the community level by the federal government. There has been no consultation, and people within the communities do not even know how they are affected by the bill. When asked about Bill C-38, I asked these people, if they did know what it was about, what would be their concerns. And the predominant consensus is that their concern would be over any changes made to the Fisheries Act or the Environment Assessment Act. Anything that alters authority, so Bill C-38 actually alters authority in that federal power is given to provincial powers in relation to environmental assessments, and the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans are given more discretion and authority. There are alters in the priority of protecting fish stock habitats, specifically fish stocks and habitats. There is a weakening of existing legislation and safeguards that protect the environment, that leave more availability for facilitates third-party interests while ignoring Aboriginal title rights, treaty rights, and the environment. So it is believed that at the community level, they are just seen as another environmental group and not as serious right holders. They lack jurisdiction at the local level, and consultation only happens at the local level if there is federal interest that intercedes through a specific First Nation territory. How do they deal with their issues at the local level? Well, the first avenue that they take is through the media and civil disobedience. So they will work in conjunction with environmental groups, the Green Party, which has been predominant because of their attachment to protecting the environment, any interest groups that have similar objectives. They will protest, they will blockade, they will make it known through the media that they are having an issue. They do not go to the court system because of the fiduciary responsibility of the federal government. They lack funds to take this route. The fiduciary responsibility basically hinders any avenues available to the communities that requires money. And lastly, they look to the Union of BC Indian Chiefs at the provincial level and the Assembly of First Nations at the national level to basically deal with the more legal aspects. The current federal system provides for 2 autonomous governments. It is within this intrastate sphere that First Nations representation can happen. There has not been proper representation at the community level. The Constitution provides for consultation with First Nations, but it does not state that the federal government has to utilize any of the information provided if the federal government chooses to consult. There has been regular consistency in governing arrangements meeting federal principles. As an example, you can see that through the bill, the Conservative government pushed through the bill, but there is a lack in communication and consultation within the First Nations communities. Governing institutions can be seen to really only work to the advantage of the 2 governments, which is the provincial and the federal levels. First Nations overall were kept out of the loop at the community level, and this can be seen through the research that's been provided by me speaking with people on the island. Now, the evidence is lacking in that only a small group of the 600 bands were contacted. But if this is the idea that this vast group on the west coast of the Canada here has not been consulted, it can only be assumed that a lot of the other First Nations have not been contacted either. So First Nations basically kept out of the loop in reference to Bill C-38 and how it possibly affected them. Next, we have the provincial level. The actors, basically there are 4 major provincial level organizations which have expressed their disdain for the bill. There's the BC Assembly of First Nations, the Union of British Columbia Indian Chiefs, the First Nations Leadership Council, the Federation of Saskatchewan Indian Nations. Now, the issues from a provincial perspective, there's the omnibus nature of the bill, the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act changes, Treaty and Aboriginal rights. There's the Fisheries Act. New definitions raise concern over fishing rates, the physical well-being of particular fishing spots, as well as to treaty and Aboriginal rights. Consultation and consent. There's the lack of consultation with Aboriginal groups by the federal government, which obstructs domestic law as well as international doctrine, which is seen in Article 19 of the United Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, outlines the legislation affecting Aboriginal communities must be passed with prior and informed consent of Aboriginal communities or representatives. There is the abuse to democracy. It is the general consensus of Aboriginal groups and other groups that the majority government has abused its powers by presenting this bill and letting it pass with very little time for consultation or discussion. The strategies and tactics. Provincial Aboriginal groups have independently contacted news media to address their concerns with the bill. This proves effective when the concerns are unified amongst different Aboriginal groups. Stronger coalitions could be made in an effort to further educate the general public of the implications this bill has. The FSIN has offered its suggestion that the federal government considers dividing the bill into separate components in the hope that this will allow for discussions to be had over facets that directly involve Aboriginal interests. The UBCIC has offered similar suggestions: divide the bill and consult with Aboriginal organizations in order to address the issues at hand. Also, Save the Fraser Declaration is underway, and this could act as a model for further discussion to be had between the levels of government. The AFN has suggested that the federal government withdraw Part 3, CEAA, and consult with Aboriginal groups regarding amending the section. The challenges at the provincial level. It is difficult to challenge a government that funds your organization. The irony and limited capacity of these groups in situations such as these is evident. However, there are individuals such as Grand Chief Stuart Phillip of the UBCIC who have committed to raise awareness of Bill C-38 in hopes that it will spark grassroots organizations to become involved, be they Indigenous or not. There is strength in numbers. Public opinion is a strong force, and awareness campaigns, rallies, and protests are one way of engaging public as a means to influence government policy. This is the direction of those who oppose the bill. Thirdly, we have the federal level. The actors, which has included the AFN, has a clear democratic national mandate to represent the 630 First Nations. The working rules are under the Canadian Constitution, consultation with First Nations people, First Nations groups as right holders, not stakeholders, should be binding as the supreme law of Canada, concerns with the call for greater provincial involvement in decision making. Can the federal government hand over its constitutional responsibilities to the different levels of government? Secondly, the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, UNDRIP, provides that free, prior, informed consent as a standard is increasingly important on the international level. It is not binding, so this makes it easy for Harper's government to ignore because of the Conservative majority in the House. The issues from a federal perspective, there are three main issues with Bill C-38 and C-45. There is a lack of consultation. The Fisheries Act is essentially not conservation-oriented and demonstrates a general lack of understanding of marine ecosystems. Changes to the Environmental Assessment Act do not respect treaties or the constitutionally protected rights of Aboriginal people. How they deal with these issues at the federal level. So what do they want? Federal and provincial policies that provide for true partnerships based on stronger engagement, better dialogue, and accountable and transparent decision-making. Support economic and social development based on free, prior, and informed consent. Clearly identify, separate protected funds that support a good faith mandate to provide technical briefings, effective opportunities for direct engagement, and consultation with First Nations. So how can these be achieved? Basically, actions. AFN acts as a highly organized, delegated forum designed to distribute political information to First Nations peoples. AFN acts as the main advocate on behalf of First Nations to the federal government. They're an organization that legislates policy by passing resolutions at annual General Assemblies, as well as Special Chiefs Assemblies. First Nations people have a deep well of social capital developed over thousands of years living in the community with land and other peoples. The federal government maintains tight control over resources designated for First Nations. The AFN asserts that the federal government does not invest these resources in ways that are beneficial to First Nations people. Nationally, First Nations enjoy varying degrees of support in the realm of public option. Most often, solidarity is demonstrated through environmental or social justice movements. Public opinion is rarely on the side of First Nations people when it comes to issues of national identity and rights to land and resources. Where can First Nations engage with governments on a national level? As a formal national political organization, the AFN is traditionally limited to engagement with governments during ministerial meetings, technical briefings. However, increasingly issues of Aboriginal rights and title are being handled in federal courts and perhaps more importantly in the court of public opinion. So just to go over what has been said at the community level, there has been no consultation. At the provincial level, there are 4 actors who have not consulted with the community level. The national level, there is the one main actor, and it can be seen that they have not provided information to the community levels either. So basically this is the presentation, and if there are any questions, please feel free to ask. Thank you.